English 122, Day 17, Definitional Arguments, from Writing Arguments, pages 210 to 236. Definitional arguments occur whenever you claim that a particular person, thing, act, or phenomenon belongs or doesn't belong within a certain categories. These categories are really implicit mini-arguments in themselves with subtle but powerful consequences of their own. What's known as the rule of justice states that beings that are within the same category should be treated the same way. This requires a digital rather than analogical approach to reality. According to William James, the rule of justice is the promise of language to fix the buzz and confusion of the world into an orderly set of categories. When working with definitional arguments, be sure to distinguish between simple categorical arguments and true definitional arguments. Simple categorical arguments occur when there is no disagreement about the definition of a category, such as in AKC dog breeding. However, true definitional arguments occur whenever stakeholders disagree about the boundaries of a category. In this case, the need to define the category adds a new layer of complexity to the argument. Be sure to distinguish between definitional arguments in which the definitions are needed versus disputed. Sometimes the definitions will simply not exist and you will have to provide one yourself. In other cases, there will be multiple definitions that are disputed that you will need to mediate between. Be sure to apply the Toulmin schema to your definitional arguments. Definitional arguments follow a two-part criteria match structure. To review our Toulmin schema, remember that a claim is always attached to a reason based on an underlying assumption known as the warrant. In this case, we have a claim, marijuana is medicine, that sets up a definition for marijuana, and then establishes a criteria that it relieves the symptoms of nausea that would match the contested case of marijuana to the definition of medicine. The underlying assumption here is that marijuana does have an effect on nausea in the first place. Let's look at this again. For our criteria match structure, you're going to start with your claim. Marijuana is medicine because it relieves the symptoms of nausea. Remember that this is a complete enthymeme because it attaches a claim to one particular reason. The definition that establishes the boundaries of the category is actually the implicit warrant, which is then proven with backing or evidence. On the other hand, the stated reasons or explicit match proves how the given case meets the definition or criteria in the warrant. Remember that the reason is always supported by evidence known as the grounds. In this way, the audience's initial beliefs and values determine how much emphasis you need to place on justifying each criteria or warrant and then supporting each match. If the audience disagrees about the definition, you'll have to spend more time overcoming those counter-arguments in the warrant part of your discussion. There are two main types of definitions that you'll be working with in your definitional arguments. The first are Aristotelian definitions, which define a term by placing it within the next larger class or category and then showing the specific attributes that distinguish the term from other terms in the same category. This relates very closely to the work we've been doing with taxonomical categories in our bio class as we look at disputed cases or different individual species and distinguish them from the next larger class by their distinguishing characteristics. In this way, you are going to identify specific attributes or criteria that enable you to distinguish a contested case from other members of the next largest class. Also distinguish between different types of criteria. particularly criteria that are accidental, necessary, or sufficient. Ask yourself, is this a true criteria or is it simply a coincidence? Must this criteria be present for something to match a definition, or is this criteria enough for something to match a particular definition? As opposed to Aristotelian definitions, also consider operational definitions, which can be measured empirically and are not subject to problems of context and disputed criteria. These are measurable definitions, but they may omit important criteria that cannot be measured empirically. So there are two basic approaches to the criteria part of a definitional argument when you are conducting a criteria match process. You can either conduct research to find authoritative definitions that are both acceptable to your audience and favorable to your case. Good sources of specialized definitions are state and federal appellate court decisions, legislative and administrative statutes, and scholarly articles examining a given definitional conflict. If you find an unfavorable definition, appeal to the original intentions of those who defined the term or propose an alternative definition. The other approach is to make up your own definition. Try to establish initial criteria by thinking of hypothetical cases that obviously fit the category you are trying to define, and then alter one or more of the variables until the hypothetical case obviously doesn't fit the category anymore. Then test and refine your criteria by applying them to borderline cases. In conducting the match part of your claim, on the other hand, you want to supply evidence to prove your definitional claim. Supply examples to show that your contested case does or does not meet the criteria you established in your definition. There are two basic approaches to writing a definitional argument. One, you can discuss the criteria and match sections separately. Or two, you can interweave your criteria and match discussions throughout the argument. Either way, you'll want to include an introduction that introduces the issue and states your overall claim, as well as a conclusion that sums up your claim at the end. Finally, beware of particular counterarguments that you'll be dealing with in definitional arguments. Be aware of counterarguments to both the criteria and the match parts of your argument. Ask yourself, could a skeptic claim that your criteria are not the right ones? Could they offer a different criteria or point to missing criteria? If so, you'll need to address those missing or different criteria as counterarguments to overcome them so they don't weaken your overall claim. Also ask, could a skeptic point out possible bad consequences of accepting your criteria or unintended effects? Could a skeptic cite unusual circumstances that would weaken your criteria or exceptions to your criteria? Could a skeptic point to some bias or slant in the definition that you have developed, or reframe the way you have viewed your borderline case as you test the definition that you've created? Always consider evidence and ask, could an skeptic argue that your evidence doesn't meet the STAR criteria? Remember, sufficiency, typicality, accuracy, and relevancy. Finally, ask yourself, could a skeptic point out counterexamples or alternative data to cast doubt on the evidence you used to prove your match? Consider these counterarguments so that they don't weaken your overall definitional arguments.